Good day. Welcome to the Cory Morgan Show, coming live from Calgary, the land of the unwashed due to lack of water. At least those who have chosen to follow the mandates and just shorten their showers and only flush on the occasional pinch. Well, Calgary just isn't smelling very good right now. But hey, only maybe 4 weeks to go and they'll get that water line fixed. There's nobody can move faster than government on fixing something up, eh? Well, lots of other stuff to cover today anyways, besides the situation in Calgary. Boy, I really appreciate my water well down in Prentice these days, though. I got guest Mark Milke, the Aristotle Foundation, coming on in a little bit. We're going to talk about a column they put out recently. And yes, lots of news and rants and things going on. Make sure you use that comment screen, guys, for the folks who are here for the live broadcast. I appreciate it. Seeing the discourse, chat with each other, send things my way. Just keep it civil. I see somebody came in early, must have seen the title of the show and threw a comment in, which I appreciate. Sunny Break said, "What are you talking about? Labor unions fight for fair wages. What I've noticed as a union employee is that an employer is within their rights to pay higher wages, but they never do. Think about it." I did think about it. I had a little time since it was an early comment coming in. Actually, employers always pay higher wages when the employee is worth more. Now, somebody in a union environment might never understand that because all they have to do is put in days and they're on a scale and they climb the scrotum pole based on seniority rather than actual performance or worth. I've predominantly been in the private market, oil field, running my own business, things like that. When an employee is worth more, you pay them more. And it's a competitive market for good workers. Unions skew that market. But either way, Sonny, if you haven't been able to find an employer to pay you more money, maybe you should look to yourself rather than the employer. The union shouldn't be what makes you earn more money. But let's talk more about that. And that's getting to what I want to talk about today. Organized labor in general. And organized labor is crushing Canada. And sadly, citizens can't expect help from the Conservative Party of Canada on this. We had the recent federal bill C-58. It whizzed through Parliament with unanimous consent, and it will be law soon. That bill makes it illegal for private companies and federally regulated sectors to hire replacement workers if there's a strike. One can expect such a terrible piece of legislation to be supported by the NDP and the Liberals. They're socialists. We expect that. One would have hoped, though, the CPC would have allowed a free vote on the bill. Sadly, we're disappointed. Instead, the vote was whipped, and every member of Parliament was forced to support it, whether they like it or not. Or we're supposed to believe that 100% of the Conservative MPs really think that handcuffing private companies like this is a good idea. The only thing that terrifies federal politicians more than Indigenous issues is organized labor. Not a single federal party is willing to stand up for Canadians against this union tail wagging the national dog, and we're all going to pay dearly for that. Canadian productivity and GDP per capita when measured against other developed countries has been in free fall for years. Inefficient unionized workplaces and a continually bloating civil service has contributed heavily towards this. Despite the growth of the federal civil service numbers by 40% in the last decade, services have become more terrible than ever. Not only that, but the government workers have become more belligerent and entitled than ever too. I mean, last year they held Canadians hostage with a strike, and this year they're threatening what they call a summer of discontent. And you want to know why? Because they might have to show up for work more than 2 days a week. Oh, Those poor dears. Public service unions have been much too powerful for far too long. Governments capitulate to union demands with little hesitation, and as if that wasn't bad enough, C58 will now empower those unions to hold private companies in fields like trucking, media, telecommunications hostage as well. Even pipeline construction is going to be subject to a ban on replacement workers if the pipeline crosses a provincial border. I mean, look how expensive the Trans Mountain pipeline expansion was, and think of how bad it's going to be now that unions are truly going to run the show. Organized labor doesn't just harm us through the skyrocketing compensation demands and the chronic labor actions and the protection of lazy workers. It actively fights against the pursuit of efficiency and changes. Canada Post is a perfect example. The days of house-to-house mail delivery should have been gone long ago. We don't need it anymore, and it costs a fortune. They're just overpaid flyer delivery boys. The Crown Corporation began moving towards centralized mailbox systems until the Postal Union managed to convince Trudeau to end this important evolution in delivery. Liberals had an election approaching, and they were afraid of the Postal Union, so they bought their support with a promise to maintain obsolete home delivery. Now Canada Post is burdening taxpayers as a chronic money loser. Last year, they lost $740 million just in 1 year, and it's not going to get any better. Now, while the union control of the postal system is an expensive annoyance, it becomes even more dangerous as unions fight reforms and efficiency in fields such as healthcare. The Canadian healthcare system is collapsing in every province, under every government of every political stripe. The rigid monopoly system has created a monster that costs more every year, while the waiting lists for procedures get longer and longer. The system itself needs reform, but unions act to fight every effort to change the status quo, and they fight it tooth and nail. Even the outsourcing of something as simple as laundry services suddenly becomes a hill for unions to die upon, and governments back away in fear from pursuing even those minor reforms. Meanwhile, people are literally dying while waiting for treatment. Unions are there for the unions, not the patients, despite what they claim. Teachers' unions, they regularly demonstrate where union priorities really are as well, despite their claims to being there for the students. They like to cloak themselves as professional associations and purport to be acting in the interest of students. Somehow the interest of the students always translates into more compensation for teachers, though, with fewer days worked. The teachers' unions dig deeply into social activism as well and bring their woke ideals into the classroom while fighting against any form of standardized testing to assess whether they're actually effectively teaching children. They say every child learns differently, yet they vigorously oppose diversity in learning through opposing charter or alternative schools. The social activism within unions has really come to a head during the Israel-Hamas conflict. QP Ontario leader Fred Hahn's vile demonstrations of anti-Semitism, he hates Jews, have horrified Canadians since the conflict began, as he coaxes his union members to actively take part in anti-Israel protests. No matter where one lands on that issue, it should be asked, why is one of the largest unions in Canada taking any role in that conflict on any side? What has it got to do with Canadian worker rights? Nobody will ask those questions, however. Even Poilievre's Conservatives have tightly gagged themselves when it comes to dealing with unions. Organized labor is spreading like an infection, while callow politicians purposely look the other way. Canada should be looking at right-to-work legislation rather than banning replacement workers in private industries. Instead, we see unanimous consent on legislation that's handcuffing industries. Sorry, kids, the economy's going down and things are going to get much worse before they get better. Either way, yes, I will call out the Conservatives when they do things wrong just as quickly as I'll call out the Liberals. And guys, they should have at least spoken up on that bill before it went through. All right, let's see what else is going on out there and check in with our news editor, Dave Naylor. Hey, Dave, how's it going?
Well, Cory, I've got to be a bit serious for a moment. You and I have known each other now for what, 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, something like that.
And I think it's fair to say that, we would consider ourselves friends.
I think so.
Okay. Can I ask a favor then?
Ride to the airport?
No. Can I come over for a bath?
Oh, yes. I was thinking of renting out the water facilities in Prentice. I could certainly offer a friend's discount.
Yeah. Well, actually, I've seen some Facebook ads. People who own their own indoor pools in Calgary are now starting to, charge people to come and use them because all the city pools are closed. So I guess it's one way to earn a little bit of extra money.
Black market swimming.
Exactly. Okay. How does 7 o'clock tonight sound? I'll be there with my little rubber ducky, and you can draw me a bath.
Yeah, just send me a preferred temperature. We'll see what we can arrange.
All right, sounds good. Anyways, what do we got on the website this morning? We've got a Regina doctor who is now being suspended for a month because he gave one of his patients ivermectin to treat him when he was suffering from COVID-19. And as we know, the medical societies have said that is a no-no. We've got a whole bunch of Toronto schools introducing a new policy for 10-year-olds when they're talking about reproductive health. They've removed the phrases men's and women's, and it's just, people with a penis and people with a uterus. There's no reference to men, women whatsoever involved in it. If you've got a flight booked on WestJet in the next little while, you might want to double check that it's going ahead. Today, WestJet canceled a whole bunch of flights because of a looming strike by mechanics and other maintenance workers. And I think, Cory, if there's one industry that you really don't want replacement workers in, it's probably aircraft mechanics.
Yeah.
You
some
kind of
areas
need,
are easier to replace than others. Yeah.
yeah, you kind of need the top people. The anti-oil wackos sort of crossed the border or crossed the line of decency again today when they attacked Stonehenge on the eve of summer solstice, when druids are about to go. They attacked it and not spray painted it, but covered it with some sort of red fire extinguisher discharge. And just people are idiots, Cory. And we had a nice exclusive this morning from our Sean Polzer. Calgary's first municipal election slate is going to kick off with an event tonight. If you remember, the UCP Alberta government changed the rules to allow party slates to run in municipal elections, and local Conservatives have got together and are taking a run at the sort of the union-backed city council that Calgary is suffering through right now. So those are the highlights. We got the latest on the Oilers win last night. Man, those Edmonton Oilers fans are sort of getting annoying, Cory, but they're still delusional. They still think they're going to win it all.
Well, it'll be over soon, one way or another. Well, right on. I'll let you get back to getting that news together, and I'll make sure to send Jane a heads up that you'll be showing up with a towel a little later this evening.
I'll be there. Thanks, Cory.
Right on. Thanks, Dave. That is our news editor, Dave Naylor. And this one, I like to remind everybody the reason Dave and Jen and Jonathan and all the rest out there are writing all these stories, getting all that content, is because you guys have been subscribed. We don't take government dollars. We pride ourselves on that. It keeps us independent. It keeps us accountable to you. And if you've subscribed already, we appreciate it. If you haven't, though, guys, nag others to subscribe and subscribe yourself. $9.99 a month, $100 a year. Come on. It's a great deal. Like the old cheesy saying goes, it's less than a cup of coffee a day. Actually, way less when you look at the price of coffee at a coffee shop these days. So get on there, westernstandard.news/subscription. Take one out. Help support us. And hey, if you're looking to push your product or service, give us an email. We do advertising as well. All right, I see back in the comments scroll. It's funny when organized labor comes up, the union guys come crawling out of the woodworks, don't they? Well, they got nothing else to do. It's not like they're working. They're at home flicking beans and doing whatever else they do because they only have to come in 2 days a week. But Gary Baggy has come in and says, so Pierre Poilievre wants to ban unions. He won't get my vote. Gary, where in this whole first, 10 minutes of this show did anybody say Poilievre wants to ban unions? In fact, what I was saying was Poilievre is afraid to do anything about unions. He's just as status quo about unions as Justin Trudeau or Jagmeet Singh. If you'd get the union wax out of your ears, maybe you would have caught that. I, however, am calling for right-to-work legislation, which, again, isn't banning unions. I would just like to see people have a choice. People could choose whether to be part of the union or shouldn't. If the unions are so good, they have nothing to fear, right? People will choose to join the union. Yet they are terrified of choice. Terrified. Abjectly terrified. Maybe it's because the unions really aren't all they're cut out to be, are they? Well, speaking of mental health issues, Elizabeth May, we talked about her last week because she had gotten the security clearance to read that report on foreign interference, and she dove into it and, somehow managed to, despite seeing double, read and interpret and come out. And she said, no, there's no MPs named in it, and there's nothing to worry about, and there's no spying going on. It's all quite fine. Strange. And a lot of course, legacy media jumped on. You see, Liz said it's fine. There's no traitors in Parliament. Liz said so. Jagmeet Singh, to the left of Liz, or well, somewhat. He had a read of it as well, and he got quite a different interpretation. He said, no, it's very concerning. There are traitors within Parliament, and we've got to work on this. And suddenly Elizabeth May has come out yet again, and she gave a press conference that was almost an hour. That was one of the times I really did actually feel pretty sorry for legacy media reporters, because they had to sit through listening to that woman ramble on for that long to basically backtrack on everything she'd said the week before. Why they give her any time? Well, I guess I'm giving her some time right now as well. She is an elected member of Parliament, and boy, she got a heck of a lot of ink over her first and then second interpretation. The bottom line is with this whole thing, we don't know. We've got to open it up, guys. We've got to add transparency to this. This is insane. This is insane. We're an international laughingstock. We've literally got traitors in our Parliament, and we can't seem to find it in ourselves to do anything about it. This is problematic, to say the very least. All right. Enough about that. I see my guest is in the lobby, and I've been looking forward to talking to him. It's been a while since he's been on. We got Mark Milke of the Aristotle Foundation to come on to talk about a recent column that came across my email. Hi, Mark. Welcome back to the show.
Cory, it's great to be on. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, thanks. So, where to start? I mean, it's the evolution of activism, I think, to a degree. Things have kind of come full circle. The big battles have been won, but now it's getting almost, it's come full circle now. Color blindness is now the new racism.
Right. New evils, or old evils rather, and old ills always show up in new ways, and possibly often in ways you wouldn't expect, right? So Chong Nguyen and I wrote a column recently on this notion of reverse racism and how this came about, where when you say you're colorblind, now you're considered to be part of the problem. You're considered to be racist. And the most famous proponent of this view is Ibram X. Kendi out of the United States, a quasi-scholar who has promoted this line of thinking. So how did we get to this place where when you say, look, I want to be Martin Luther King, his famous speech in 1963 at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., where he says, judge people. I want my kids to be judged on the color of their skin, or sorry, the content of their character, not the color of their skin. How do we get to a place now in Canada, the United States, and in Western countries anyway, where to say I'd like to be colorblind, to be treated colorblind, I am colorblind, is now suspiciously looked at. Well, really, you're part of the problem. And how this came about in part is because of the redefinition of what it means to be racist these days. Cory?
Yeah, well, and it just seems that they're trying to keep the divisions going when we'd actually been making them fade. I mean, race is going to be there. Cultural differences are going to be there. They don't have to be erased or disappear. But what we wanted to work towards was allowing those differences to control our actions with and to each other. But now it's come full circle into trying to embrace and segregate the different cultures and races from each other, which is only going to lead to more friction yet all over again. I just get so frustrated watching it. I mean, the celebration of a Black-only graduation recently and other events where we should be working together, while still celebrating cultural and history and things like that, but we're going the other way.
Well, we are. And again, I think it's due to a number of factors. One is that people look at differences in outcomes between cohorts, right? Statistical cohorts. So, you can be, one ethnicity versus another, or majority of population white in Canada versus, the Black population or something. So you can carve up statistics in this way. And, there's some use in doing that to figure out what's going on. Is some particular community is defined by however you want to carve up, cohort and statistics, doing well or better on some indicator. So, for example, we know that Indigenous Canadians are not doing well on average compared to, say, other Canadians or compared to Taiwanese Canadians. Now, the assumption, though, that a lot of people have is they see a difference in outcomes and they say, okay, that must be due to racism. Now, why people pick one factor, there's a whole bunch of reasons, I guess, but it's monocausal. It's wrong. So why is there a difference between, say, Indigenous Canadians on average incomes and, say, Taiwanese Canadians on average incomes? Well, one factor, education levels. Taiwanese Canadians are among the most educated as a group in Canada on average compared to, say, Indigenous Canadians. And guys like you and me with our skin color are in the middle of somewhere. So is that due to racism? No, it's due to education levels. Or another factor that can affect incomes is, again, using Indigenous Canadians or First Nations Canadians as a specific example, is a greater proportion of First Nations Canadians live in the middle of nowhere, often, not always, but often on a reserve. A greater proportion live in rural areas because they live on a reserve in the middle of nowhere. Well, we know whether you're white, Indigenous, Asian Canadian, if you live in a rural area, you will earn less. So you add education, you add geography, and all of a sudden, this notion that everything can be due to, is assumed to be due to racism today or past racism becomes ridiculous. There's lots of other factors that go into why people succeed or not, and even why certain cohorts succeed. So that's part of the problem, is people are thinking simplistically when they see differences in outcomes. A famous example I like to give is from Thomas Sowell in one of his books. He talks about the differences between Italians, and the Swiss. And apparently, historically, in fishing fleets around the world, the Italians dominate the fishing fleets. Now, not the Swiss. Is that because the Swiss are discriminated against, by those in the fishing fleets, when they try and enter? No, historically or geographically, the reason is quite simple. Italians grow up around coastlines. The Swiss have none. And so it stands to reason, if you're from Switzerland, you're less likely to have ever, gotten on a boat and certainly entered the commercial fishing industry. There's all sorts of reasons why groups differ in outcomes, but we've arrived at a stage where everything is blamed on racism, or most things. That's nonsensical, it's monocausal, it's simplistic, but that's what's driving federal policy, for example, out of provincial policy, university admissions policy, university hiring policy, I could go on, corporate DEI. So we live in this weird age as well, where people think pure culture is going to save them from, whatever. And that, the Black only graduation ceremonies you mentioned a moment ago, that's a good example of that. And I can expand on that, but that's actually really dangerous to think your culture is going to save you. But I'll stop there and let you interject, Cory.
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the things you'll get from activists and the pushback you'll always say is, so you're saying racism doesn't exist or something like that. And that's not the case at all. There's still some terribly bigoted individuals out there. There's going to be some companies that decline to hire other people based on race, or landlords who aren't renting to certain individuals based on race. These things are there, but we're beyond the big institutional racism. I mean, the American Jim Crow laws are long gone. The ability to openly discriminate based on race has been wiped out legislatively anyways.
Well, and that's the key difference, isn't it, Cory, that people need to remember? That when you hear accusations of systemic racism or institutional racism today, people are often sloppy. They're not defining what they mean. So they conflate the notion that, yes, of course, you can meet a bigot on the street or online these days that says something that's, racist or whatever, ridiculous. That hasn't gone away, unfortunately. Although I think even societal attitudes have changed dramatically in the last 70 years in the post-war world, and the polls seem to indicate that. But that, meeting an individual bigot or racist out there is not the same thing as systemic institutional racism. And when you make systemic racism just kind of this ether in the air that we all breathe in, well, it's unprovable, it's unfalsifiable, right? And so, frankly, it's unscientific and anti-scientific, that claim. Institutional or systemic racism is when a white hospital in San Francisco a century ago says to Chinese Americans, you can't come here. Or an Ivy League university says to Jewish Canadians or Americans, in the 1930s, you can't enter into this university in above a certain proportion of the student population. That is institutional and systemic racism. But a lot of this was carved away legislatively starting in the 1910s in some cases. In PEI, for example, there's a law that started to work against discrimination that way. Most perhaps famously in the largest province in the country in the 1950s, Ontario passed laws in the 1950s against discrimination on religious grounds or racial grounds in accommodation, housing, hiring in the early 1950s. And yet we have people 70 years later that think we live in a systemic, institutionally racist country. No, we don't. We did, or those before us did at one point, and it was pretty common around the world, unfortunately. But that, legislatively, as you mentioned, was done away with 70 years ago in many cases.
Yeah, well, and so I wondered to some degree if we've got a case of activists who just don't know what else to do with themselves. Like somebody else sent me an article on it was on LGBTQ issues, but it was called a March of Dimes syndrome, and it's quite interesting actually. It was talking about how the March of Dimes, which was an activist group to bring about the end of polio and inoculation, came along, and it kind of did that. But now these activists didn't know what to do with themselves anymore, and they marched right into different causes because their activism becomes their sense of
Need something to
being,
do.
and
Yeah.
they can't
Yeah.
see a finish line anymore.
I mean, look, I get it. I once worked for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. It's how I got my start in advocacy and public policy, starting in 1997. It goes back a ways. But I remember thinking at one point, what if we actually get, a lot of these, what if we get government spending under control, and get them to stop spending money on dumb things as opposed to, the smart things government should spend our tax dollars on? What if we get tax rates down to a certain extent where, I'm saying, well, maybe we need a few more tax dollars. That theory has never been tested. But, at some point, you keep going as an activist. And unfortunately, we've gone in the wrong direction on those issues. But I get the temptation to keep going to find a new cause. And I suppose there will always be causes to attach oneself to. But then what you want to do is make sure that it's the right cause and you're actually diagnosing the problem correctly. Because if you're not, let's go back to the Indigenous Canadians example. You know why we shouldn't focus on racism or historic racism as a reason why Indigenous Canadians are in the plight that some of them are today, not all, but on average, again, compared to other cohorts. One of the reasons we shouldn't blame everything on racism or most things is because it has to do with geography. It has to do with education. We know from StatsCan data that if you're a First Nations Canadian, Indigenous Canadian of any stripe, you will do better in cities than you will in rural locations because the educational and career opportunities are there. We also know that if you get your education up, and if you do an apple-to-apple comparison among Indigenous Canadians to other Canadians, and I've done these and they're in my past books, you will see that there's no difference between incomes for, the average Canadian, the non-Indigenous Canadian out there rather, and an Indigenous person in this country, if they have the same education levels and work full year, full time. What does that tell you? What it tells you is that some of these problems are solvable through moving off the reserve to a city or nearby a city and getting an education. That's actually tremendously positive. But if you blame everything on systemic racism and you concentrate on this mysterious ether in the air, you're never going to solve anything. And so it's actually very damaging to focus on the wrong cause for a wrong assumed cause for an effect that you see out there. When people get it wrong and activists get it wrong, they do damage to the very people they think they're trying to help.
Yeah, so not seeing race makes you a racist now. It's hard to keep up with where to be right and wrong anymore. I like to think common sense can dominate, but I mean, here comes the hard part. As a society, we're trying to move forward. We're trying to get better. There were wrongs. There's still some issues to deal with. What should we be doing aside from what has been being done? What's the solution, I guess?
Well, focus on people as individuals, right? And focus on things like poverty as opposed to, and other ways to get people up out of poverty, as opposed to what you look like, your skin color, where you're from. Right? That makes more sense. One of the things we just did at the Aristotle Foundation is publish a paper by Matthew Lau and David Hunt. They looked at poverty in Canada. And lo and behold, because, guys and gals with our skin color are the majority of population, you would find that the majority of people in poverty, in terms of the numbers, happen to be white. I don't like using language like white and black. Again, I think it divides people unnecessarily, but that's the Statistics Canada language, or non-minority, non-Indigenous, by which StatsCan means white. The fact is, some cohorts like Black Canadians or Indigenous Canadians show a greater proportion of their cohort in poverty, but in absolute numbers, the 2.5 million Canadians who happen to be Caucasian and happen to be in poverty. And rather than focus on skin color or ethnicity, it's better to focus on things like two-parent family, on are there actual barriers to people getting into the workforce. Then that way you're being colorblind and gender blind and ethnicity blind and identity blind, which is what we should be doing. Because after all, I used to use this example before Bill Cosby became toxic, but why would you have an affirmative action program, a quota program, which helps the grandson of, say, Bill Cosby, based on skin color, as opposed to, some poor kid whose, parents survived the Great Depression or something, or grandparents did, or maybe a Jewish Canadian whose grandparents survived the Holocaust. Why would you help people based on skin color as opposed to poverty? You end up helping the wrong people. And in fact, David and Matthew found just this in their Aristotle Foundation study. The benefits go to the connected, the politically connected in any group, as opposed to, again, thinking about, let's concentrate on getting on lifting all boats, and getting people out of poverty, regardless of their skin color. Anything else is really, you don't treat people as individuals, and you begin picking on people again based on their what they look like, and that's regressive. I mean, Pierre Trudeau would have never agreed with most of this, right? Unlike his son. He was very much a classic liberal that said, look at the individual, emphasize individual rights over collectivist, at least, non-economically. He was a collectivist on the economic stuff, but not the rest of it. So I think you have to look at the individual, Cory. That's where you want to start. And all of the rest of this is heading down the wrong road that, is much of human history, dividing based on characteristics that don't matter and shouldn't matter.
Well, it's a place to start too, is having those sensitive conversations, I guess, and have the courage to dip into those waters when there's so many people willing to shout you down. And the Aristotle Foundation's been happy to go into the facts of matters and report on as you interpret. Where can people find your work and support you guys if they like to?
AristotleFoundation.org, and you can also find our first book, The 1867 Project, on Amazon and in local bookstores.
Right on. Well, I appreciate you coming on to talk to us today, Mark, and the work you guys do. And hopefully we can talk about this again sometime soon.
Anytime. Thank you, Cory.
Great. Thank you. So, yes, that was Mark Milke of, as he said, the Aristotle Foundation. And yes, the 1867 Project, great book. A lot of good work they do. And I mean, there's part of it. Again, nobody's saying, and I don't like the shouting down when this conversation comes up. That's the problem. When somebody points to other socioeconomic factors that might lead to an identifiable group that's lagging in other outcomes. Perhaps race is one of the contributing factors, but if you feel that is it doesn't mean it's the only contributing factor. You can't let that override every other measure and what's going on, what's happening there. Why is one community having a better time with things than others? And there's certainly measurable differences we can see, as he said, with Indigenous Canadians, with some Black Canadians, they're having a harder time. Some Asian Canadians are having they're very successful, and they dealt with, Canada treated the Asian Canadians terribly at the turn of the century last, 100 years ago. But they moved beyond it. So what is happening? What's the difference? Let's look at what's making the successes rather than worrying about the divisions. Again, it doesn't mean you're saying it doesn't exist. It doesn't mean the saying the racism isn't there, but maybe it's not the overwhelming immediate factor. And plus, when we keep the divisions up, then maybe we can actually, even if well-intentioned, make things worse, as we're always working at cross purposes or seeing somebody as a competitor or an adversary rather than just a fellow citizen. But either way, they're conversations that we have to have, and we'll carry on having as we go ahead. So let's talk about another guy in the conversation. This is interesting. I saw this pop up, and this is on the Western Standard too, I believe. Andrew Leach, and not everybody may be familiar with him. He's an economist at the University of Alberta. Poor devil's a ginger. He's had a lot of rough goes in his life as it is. But on top of all of that, he's always been just pushing the line before for Rachel Notley's government with the NDP, and he's just been a harsh critic of Premier Smith and Poilievre, with hard left criticism, which is fine. Everybody has their point of view. But the difference is, because he was a darling guest of legacy media, he'd always be on to talk about policy and economic issues, particularly with the energy sector and oil field carbon taxes. Well, lo and behold, and he trolls on social media. He calls people things. That's fine. I do that too. The difference, he got $68,000 from the federal government to be out there trolling social media. I don't get any of that, which is fine. I don't want federal dollars. I'm not asking for federal dollars. I am worried, though, when these experts, remember, everybody keeps saying, you got to listen to the experts. You're not an expert. You're not an expert. This is the expert you got to talk to. No, don't listen to that expert. This expert over here is the one who's got it all figured out. Well, Andrew Leach was supposedly an expert. No, he's a lackey. He's a lackey. He just goes where his bread's buttered, and that bread butter was coming from the Liberal Party of Canada. $68,000 in consultancy fees. Yeah, they received from the headline in the Western Standard. He called conservatives sociopaths. So isn't this a neat cycle of your dollars? You work your butt off, union or non-union. You pay your taxes. They go to that big pot out there with Justin drooling over it, and other levels of government, and they give a chunk of it back to guys like this, so he can go on to legacy media outlets and spread BS and take partisan stances and slash and cut at them. So I thank, and it was Blacklock's reporter that dug that out. Thank you for digging it out. So let's just remember that every time Mr. Leach wants to come up and take his swipes, Who's paying your bills this week, Mr. Leach? Me, probably in the long run. But, with the sole sourced contracts for consulting you've gotten, chances are it's the Trudeau government. And it just never stops. Either way, expose them when they get it. Hopefully we can turn things over and fix things a little. I mean, there's no quick fixes, no immediate fixes for anything in Ottawa. It never works that way, unfortunately. But when we see it happening, point it out, say, hey, that guy's just another paid lackey of the federal Liberals. Speaking of which, legacy media, interesting to watch. They're going down. They're going down hard and fast. Unfortunately, it's going to probably lead to more bailouts. But I've been watching, Chorus Entertainment, and they got a large media empire, or they used to. Their stock is down in the last 5 years over 97%. They were around 14 cents a share this morning. It's just completely collapsing. Now, that group runs Global News and a whole pile of radio stations, in Alberta 630, CHED, and QR77. Now, some people have been talking about that, saying, "Oh, go woke, go broke." It's the terrible content on those talk radio channels that's led to this. Yeah, it doesn't help. I mean, it really has gone downhill. It's almost unlistenable the way they've gotten these days. But the bigger problem is they've got hopelessly outdated media models. That's the reality. Even if their content was better, the main one that gets me is I spend a lot of time driving, and I still listen because it's the only radio stations you can get for now. Hopefully that'll change. But they got a traffic helicopter. How much does it cost to get a traffic helicopter up and flying around the city of Calgary every day to report on something that people now can figure out on their phone through Google Maps in seconds? Why? Why are you wasting that money? Why are you pouring that money down the drain when your industry is going down the drain? But that's what I mean. These industries, they've been around too long in the incarnation that they have. They don't know how to change. They don't know how to flex, which all that tells us, don't bail them out, let them die. They've got to go. Likewise, when you watch the evening news and you see the meteorologist give the weather report, that was fantastic 30 years ago. Now I can find out on my phone within seconds what the forecast looks like for the next few days. Why are you keeping that person on staff? Nothing against the meteorologist. We just don't need it anymore. But they won't change their models to change with the times. So if they won't change their model, time to go, guys. It's over. And it looks like that's happening with Chorus. We'll see. CTV, likewise, big layoffs. The government keeps bailing them out, and they just keep laying people off because you can't bail out a broken model fast enough. And of course, then you got the CBC in the midst of things there, that giant, ugly monster, that tax-funded thing that nobody watches anyways. They get a guaranteed $1.4 billion a year. And the irony of that whole thing is, of course, that's part of what's crushing the other private but bailed out media outlets that are existing out there, because CBC is competing for those same advertising dollars and the eyes of viewers while they're out there. It's a sick, ugly model we have in Canada right now. And it's time to let them go. Just let them go. No more bailouts. Fix yourselves or go away. And yes, sure, I got self-interest. I'm with an independent media outlet here. That's fine. But hey, I'm not afraid of competing. Come on, get it together. Compete with us. Just quit asking taxpayers to bail you out. Wilder's saying, I don't know, it would be kind of nice to hear news, weather, and sports at 7 p.m. Well, fine. And if a station can provide that without tax dollars, let them go. Go to town. But if they can't, well, c'est la vie. I used to like browsing to get videos at the Blockbuster store, but those days are gone as well. Speaking of bailouts, let's look at that. A report from the Parliamentary Budget Officer. Boy, Trudeau's really learning to hate that, but he can't even pronounce it probably. Either way, he can't read those reports unless they come in, like a pop-up book form for him or something. But it's found that government subsidies for electric vehicle factories. Justin's been running around cutting ribbons all over the place for these EV factories, even though private factories, Ford and others, are all actually scaling back their EV production because nobody wants to buy the friggin' things. They're too expensive. They wear out too fast. They don't have a good enough range. They're damn near useless in winter. So we just keep bailing them out. Well, the subsidies going in are $52 billion in Canada. Subsidies, your dollars, $52 billion. You know how much the private industries put into them in Canada? $46 billion. The government is more invested in the EV market than the companies. Pardon me. It's insane. It shows how unviable That industry is. Again, we shouldn't be dipping into it. We should be getting the heck away from it as fast as humanly possible. But he keeps diving in deeper and deeper and deeper. I brought it up at a speaking event I was at last week. Anybody familiar with Southern Alberta? You drive south of Calgary by High River. If you look to the west, a lot of people, you'll see a big brick building there, just sitting there. It's been there forever. It's been there actually since the late 80s, early 90s. It's part of the Don Getty government diversifying Alberta's economy. They took tax dollars, $500 million of them, which is a lot today. That's a massive amount back in the late 80s, early 90s. And they said, we're going to diversify Alberta's industries by investing in a magnesium plant. That's what that big red abomination is off the highway over there. It's a magnesium plant. It was only open for a couple of months and went broke. And then it has sat there, unoccupied, for getting, well over 30 years now. That's what happens when government gets into business. We're going to see that with these electric vehicle factories. It's funny, I was always thinking, and the problem with that magnesium factory as well is that it was so specialized, the way it was built and everything else, you just can't use it for anything else. So it just sits there, and you see a security guard there, and you see a light on there, so I guess they maintain it and keep it up, but it doesn't do anything. But I think it should stay there. I think they should let it rot, though. Turn off the power, take away the security, let the graffiti get up there, let the bricks fall down. Let this thing stand as a testament to what happens when governments get into business. It fails every time. So yeah, we're going to look at a bunch of electric vehicle factories in Eastern Canada. Notice these subsidies, of course, from Trudeau are pouring in, there's no mistaking it, into the areas he wants to win votes. Eastern Canada, they aren't coming out here. I don't want the subsidies out here. I just don't want them given out at all. But again, $52.5 billion tax dollars into this industry when private industry only put in 46. Man, this is not good, guys. This is not good at all. Speaking of Trudeau, he brought up the unmarked graves canard the other day, too. He just throws everything out there as he gets near a microphone. He's almost as bad as his little gal there, Lizzie May. He was going on about the unmarked graves at residential schools. I've gotten to the point now on saying it, at least with the Kamloops case, it's a hoax. I'm going to say it outright. It's a hoax. It's been over 3 years. They've gotten $8 million to find even one body, much less 200 or 215. They haven't found a single one because they aren't looking, because there aren't any bodies there. It was a hoax, one of the biggest hoaxes, I think, in world history. The whole nation was in mourning. There's still a bunch of shoes and a bunch of teddy bears and garbage on Calgary City Hall steps representing the 215 bodies that were in Kamloops, but there's no bodies. It was a hoax. And Trudeau is still playing up that hoax. And if you want to prove, if you're upset when I call it a hoax, because people get upset on social media when I do that, fine. Tell them to get a shovel, put in a few hours work, and find a body. Shouldn't be that hard. Shouldn't take 3 years. It shouldn't take $8 million. It's a hoax. It's a bunch of baloney. And it's really divided this nation badly. It's really harmed a lot of people. And that idiot prime minister we have is perpetuating it. He's still putting it out there, still to this day. You'd think. As I've noticed, a lot of activists have kind of gotten quiet on that thing lately. Even the band itself is now calling them anomalies, the Indigenous band, rather than grave sites like they used to. Not Justin. No, he's still going to play this right to the bitter end. Meanwhile, dividing Canadians and making them think there was mass murder committed at the Kamloops residential school. And again, this gets back to the race discussion and everything too. Just because I'm questioning the hoax of the bodies at Kamloops school doesn't mean I'm saying there was no abuses at residential schools. See, that if-then statement is constantly the way it works when you get with these activists who thrive on all this. And no, I'm not saying the residential schools were not nice places. I'm not saying there was never abuses that happened within them. I'm saying, though, that there aren't 200 bodies buried in Kamloops. And you know what? The burden of proof is on you guys now. Show me the body. Yeah, I won't hold my breath. Getting into where the stupidity of things is, Dave mentioned that it's in the Western Standard on the news, too. The Toronto District School Board, and boy, those guys are crazy. They had actually over 1,000 Jewish protesters, I think, over last weekend outside of their offices or the other day, because, of course, they have chosen in their woke insanity anti-Semitic crap, which is, anti-Semitism, the left has really embraced it these days, hasn't it? So want to stop teaching about the Holocaust, because get sympathy for those darn Jews. They're nuts. The Toronto District School Board is so woke and far left, it's insane. But now, yes, so 10-year-old boys and girls Oh, not allowed to say boys and girls. Yeah, that's the school thing. They're not boys and girls. They're not women and men. They are. Woman, how do you like this? You're a person with a uterus. This is what the children are being taught in school today. This isn't a wacko screaming on a street corner. This isn't a pamphlet given out somewhere. This isn't some weird website. This is being taught to 5th graders. There aren't any women anymore, just people with uteruses and people with penises and people who have more testosterone and people who have more estrogen. This is insane. This is ludicrous. They're men and women. Get over it. The activists have gone bananas, but that's fine. There's always nutcases. There's always extremists. There's always activists. Quit indulging them, though. That's the problem. We're giving people with authority the ability to act on what these nut bars are asking for. And look at the crap that's coming out. It's nuts. All right, another thing going on. Yes, tonight for folks in Calgary, the first political party is taking off. There's going to be a rally at, used to be called the Blackfoot Inn. I think it's one of the Holiday Inns now. If you look it up, it's on Blackfoot Trail down 58th Avenue, Calgary. They're going to have their kickoff tonight. So the first political party getting in there. And, we talk about some terrible, bad, wacko civic politicians getting in. This is the way to vet them. This is the way to fix that up. If you're interested in that sort of thing, get on down there and check it out, because the more the merrier. The problem is there's always wackos looking to take over these new parties too. There's wackos on the right. Rest assured, there's wackos on the right. And if you want to keep the wackos on the right from taking over this party in the early stages, get down there now, because there's safety in numbers. And make sure that common sense dominates this thing before the Fruit Loops take hold of it and destroy it. And then you see Yodi Gondek in for yet another term, because that is what'll happen. And yes, Stonehenge was vandalized with spray paint, another news item. Again, have they considered charging and convicting some of these activists? I know it's a crazy thought, but I'm pretty sure there's laws against this. Again, indulging the insane. Stop it. Stop it. You know what? These are white bread wimps. These are nerds and dorks. Stick them in jail for even a week with general population. I'm not saying to have them abused or assaulted, but certainly scared. And I got a feeling you're going to see a whole heck of a lot fewer artworks being destroyed, fewer historical things like that being destroyed by these nut bars. But as long as you give kid gloves with these idiots, that's what's going to happen. Okay, my time's run out. This weekend, I'm going to be at the Quilt Canada show in Edmonton at a booth. Long story as to why that's happening, but I'm going to be there. If you happen to be in the area, drop by, say hi. I'm not into quilting, but I'm filling in for somebody who needs the help. Yes, my wife. She puts up with a lot, so God, I'd be crazy not to help her at this point. Aside from that, I will see you all here again at this time next week. Be sure to tune into the pipeline tonight. And we'll dissect a whole bunch more issues with a panel. So thanks for tuning in. See you next time.